as the Secretary for Central Board of NGO Federation of Nepal, an apex body of Nepali civil society organization. She is currently working as an expert for Ministry of Youth and Sports. Previously, she was appointed as an executive member of the National Youth Council Ministry of Youth and Sports for 4 years. So I give you Ms. Bawana Bata to present on the democratization challenges and opportunities in Nepal. I give you, Ms. Bata, the floor.
Okay. Thank you so much, Karel, for this brief introduction. And first of all, thank you so much, ADN and May 18 Memorial Foundation for having me here. It is my great pleasure. Actually, we are now in the pandemic situation. The world is hiking from the COVID-19. So I wish everybody is safe, and the situation of Nepal is very panic. The death ratio is getting higher. Every day about 200 people are dying because of not having oxygen, not having bed properly, or care, or ventilator, and like medicines, such kind of problem we have been facing these days. And third level of variant is also confirmed yesterday. So the problem is getting higher, and the Nepali people are in panic situation. So hopefully after some months or some maybe within a year, all the situation will be normal and we will definitely overcome. Having said this, thank you so much for organizing this virtual meeting. A warm greetings from Nepal. And I will be, talking about the history of democratization process in Nepal, and then the trend, the challenges, and what can be the way forward in the Nepali context. So, first of all, Nepal Nepal has been moving from the autocratic regime of the Rana family to democratization since 1951. After the introduction of democracy in 1951, in Nepal, the then government introduced a 5-year development program. It was 1956 to 1961. And then the king promulgated the 1962 constitution, under which the country was divided into zones, districts, and village panchayat. The king also promulgated the National Code Act in 1964, making all caste and tribals equal. Underground political parties commenced movement against the king and the government in 1990s to throw out the panchayat system for multi-party democracy. King Brinder declared multi-party system with the king under the Constitution of Nepal in 1990s. And then the Maoist movement paved the way to raise marginalized people's voice and strengthen the social movement for change during the period 1996 to 2006. Almost all the parties in Nepal commenced the second movement in 2006. The first movement was in 1990. And the second movement was very powerful in terms of having a democracy in establishment. The Constituent Assembly election is 2008. The interim government has passed acts in favor of females and scheduled caste, and which says the 33% women should be in parliament, and other positive discrimination process is also in place. Before 2006, the proportion of female in the parliament was only about 6%. After the peace process agreement of 2006, the interim government provided more rights in favor of females and lower caste people with reservation and priority seats. And if we see the local election, there is a number of youth. For example, youth in local bodies are 39.64%, and provincial parliament there is 23%, and the federal parliament there is 13% of youth participation, and similarly in the National Assembly it is 6%. It means in the local level youth participation in the decision making is high. Still in the central level and the provincial level we need to work more. Current state of the state building is in Nepal is that we have a new constitution 2015, which is considered as one of the foremost achievements for institutionalizing democracy. Replacing the interim constitution from 2007 defines Nepal as a federal democratic republic and provisions 3 tiers of government. There is local, provincial, and federal government. Federalization of principal state structure. There is 1 federal, there is 7 provincial, and 553 local government. Promulgation of necessary laws and policies. They are free to promulgate. They have their own right. And human rights frameworks as the basis of state delivery. Specialized agencies for addressing specific human rights issues of the targeted communities. Local and provincial government hold a varieties of political, fiscal, as well as administrative power. 35 powers are given to the federal government, 21 to the provincial government, and 22 to the local government. At the same time, there are 25 concurrent powers between federal and provincial governments, whereas 15 are shared between federal, provincial, and local government. And separation of power between executive, legislative, and judiciary at all levels of governance. Rights and authorities of all levels of governance are clearly mentioned in the Constitution. A periodic election for each levels of governance, powerful oversight bodies, accountability mechanism in place. There are about 11 constitutional bodies, which is under the Constitution. But we see the implementation and the process, the people who are leading it is different, but the constitutional power is oversight. Processes in place for peace building and state building and social political cohesion is there. So relation between 3 layers or among 3 layers, we can see there is the mutual cooperation, which is clearly written by Constitution, coexistence, and coordination. They have to work in 3 different approaches like cooperation, coexistence, and coordination. Government needs to ensure necessary directives as per the Constitution. The government may suspend or dissolve the Council of Ministry of the province and the Provincial Assembly if any province indulges in any act that would have a serious effect to national sovereignty and integrity. There is also the provincial council system where Prime Minister is chair, Home Minister of Government of Nepal is member, Finance Minister of Government of Nepal is a member, Chief Minister of respective provinces are member. But the meeting of this inter-provincial council is, like in 5 years period, just 2 or 3 meetings are held. Issues and challenges, administrative hurdles and financial burdens is there. Conflict regarding revenue system, who is doing what, how much who is taking. Lack of normative framework in response to concurrent list, because some of the concurrent rights are overlaps. Lack of necessary model laws. Fiscal government are preparing some of the model laws, but which are not enough. Fiscal federalization is not there. They are just, we are working the yearly basis, but there is no like financial and other things. Resource mobilization and sustainability is the issue. Understanding level towards federalism. People still, they don't know. Still, some of the hospitals, they are, they are controlled by federal government, and there is still the unitary mindset of bureaucracy or political leader. So there is no proper understanding about the federalism, and centralized mindset and unitary legacy, human rights based approach in localizing the power and enhancing outreach. Politicizations even in basic services, health, water, education, sanitary, and there is still impunity and corruption. If you see among the leaders, among the bureaucrats, among from other like business person, there is impunity and corruption everywhere. There are some cases which impunity is like more protected. Criminal people are more politicized, and politics is criminalized. If we see the last 10-year history, people who are involved in the criminal, they are now in politics, and if the political issues are like also the criminalized, and some of the people are also leading the government or political parties or some gangs. So completion of truth and reconciliation and disable work is still there. because we had a 10-year armed conflict from 1996 to 2006, and there were lots of hope that the then Maoist was in government, and then the communist-led government was there. There are 2/3 of majority, but the situation of conflict victim is same. It is not resolved. There was about 20,000 people were killed, and 2,000 was disappeared. But the reparation of their situation, relief situation, reconstruction is still need to work on that. Small armed group are in the political at the latest example that there are lots of small armed group. The government is like having dialogue with the small armed group. It is quite good that the peace process is happening. They are in the main political mainstream, but all the crime they did before is forgiven. This is the very bad culture that we have been establishing. So adaptation of bad practices of parliamentary government is there. We had a dissolution of federal parliament before, and after the Supreme Court decision, a verdict, it is again the parliament is existed, and there are some like especially in Karnali province, Gandaki province, and Lumbini province, their government is making government, and then again giving resignation, and in the very difficult situation of a pandemic, they are more focusing on the leadership, only the chair, not the responding the coronavirus pandemic. So some of the people, like political parties or political members, they are changing political parties and crossing party whips, especially the parliament in Karnali province. So there is the parliamentary discipline and leaders ethics is in threat nowadays in Nepal. Some areas of improvement can be, like first, government, 3 layers of government, especially the federal government has to critical review and reflection. They has to do that. And the second, the exploitation management, because we had a 2/3 of government before, and lost of because in Nepal, we were facing the 7 months government, 8 months government. It was very fragile, the political situation, and government was very, changing time and again. So there was not a stability. So people had a very, very high expectation from the government. So the government has to think on that and has to work. And third, the political, economic, psychological, and behavior preparedness is necessary among all political parties and all bureaucrat. So then only we can go ahead. And the fourth is that the educate knowledge and capacity building opportunity for elected local and provincial government leaders and bureaucrats. Still, there is lack of knowledge about federalism, resource management, health, every sector. Like in the bureaucracy also, there are only in the federal, but there should be in the provincial level. Lots of government offices are vacuum because of not having specialized bureaucrat. So the federal structure should focus on structural changes, particularly on public policy agendas. Still the government, there are some of the policies they are also making in the provincial and local level, but it is saying that if there is mandatory laws made by the federal government, then only the provincial and local government are adopting. So they are not proactively working in the community level, rather just implementing as before we had a unitary system. It is like same. Though in a first wave of coronavirus, the local government has did like very tremendous work. It is very remarkable. They have done in their capacity. They utilize their resources, human resources as well as financial resources. But the provincial government, they should also be more active to control and manage coronavirus and other like daily issues. and also the addressing the needs and concern of socially deprived people should be another key focus of the new federal structure. We have about all kind of policies and laws in place, like constitutional remedies is there. People who are from lower caste, so-called lower caste, and people from marginalized communities, and women, they have a quota, they have a positive discrimination, but it is like just in a number, but the capacity building program and other is not having done so far. There is, for example, um, there is a commission called Women Commission. There is commission called the Lead Commission. There is Ethnic Commission. There is also the Inclusion Commission. But Inclusion Commission, there is about 3 to 5 people they appointed yesterday, but all are male from upper caste. So the meaning of inclusion itself is not respected. So in that way, we have a very good laws, very good policies, but the implementation is very like weak. So finally, the educate provision to create a wider civic space where citizens, institutional opposition parties, and other can express their concern through non-violence approach should be taken. So these are the key points that I wanted to highlight here. So if there is any questions or queries, I will be happily responding them. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bawana Bata of Nepal. Now we will proceed and go to a neighboring country. It's in Pakistan, and we are fortunate to be joined by Ms. Gulalai Ismail of the Aware Girls. So Ms. Gulalai Ismail is the founder and chairperson of Aware Girls, a young women-led organization working towards gender equality and peace, which she established at the age of 16. She has over 13 years of experience on human rights and peace work, directly included included drafting policies and implementing projects across a range of young women empowerment work. Inclusion of young women in peace building processes and conflict resolution, gender-based violence, girls' education, countering violent extremism, peace building governance, and organizational strengthening. She has received 2009 Youth Action Net Fellowship, the 2012 International Democracy Award, the 2014 Humanist of the Year Award, the 2015 Commonwealth Youth Award for her extraordinary efforts in peace building, gender equality, and development. She has also been recognized among the 100 leading global thinkers by Foreign Policy 2013 and among the 30 under 30 youth activists by the National Endowment for Democracy in the United States. She also received the Chirac Peace Prize by the Chirac Foundation in France. Gulalai also received the 2017 RAW in WAR Award for Prevention of Conflict and Peace Building. In 2018, Gulalai also was nominated for the Luxembourg Peace Prize. So to present on the state of democratization in Pakistan, I give you Ms. Gulalai. Ms. Gulalai, you have 10 minutes to talk about Pakistan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karel, and thank you to Asia Democracy Forum for inviting me to speak in the Gwangju Democracy Forum. And thank you for such a nice introduction. Let me tell you that it's midnight at my end, but I'm very glad to stay up late tonight and to speak to all of you about the trends and threats to democracy in Pakistan. So, since its creation, since the creation of Pakistan in 1947, Pakistan has spent several decades under the military rule. Actually, for more than half of the time, Pakistan has been under the rule of a military dictatorship. And it is for the very first time in the history of Pakistan that it is witnessing consistent democracy for the past 13 years. Since 2007, we have seen consistent democracy and peaceful transition from one political government to another political government without the direct control of the military. However, in the past 13 years, instead of seeing improvement in the democracy, instead of seeing strengthening of democracy and strengthening of political institutions and constitutional institutions, we have seen that the political parties have ceded spaces. The military establishment is now having control of the governments indirectly rather than directly. Being in the government, they are indirectly controlling. Most of the institutions are under the control of military establishment. Decisions are made by the military establishment. They are the one who call the shots, and the military establishment is having complete control of the governance from the federal and national level, even to the very local level. However, before I kind of like speak about what are the threats to democracy, I also want to shed some light on how young people in Pakistan in the past few years, they have been organizing and they're building movements, and they are replacing the existing traditional political class because they don't feel relevant. The young people of Pakistan, you can see that they don't feel relevant to the traditional political parties who are serving interests of the military establishment. To gain access to the parliament, young people have shown greater support to the politics of democracy and to the politics around respect of vote, to the politics about anti-military establishment narrative. And one of the biggest example is Pashtun Tahafuz movement, or we can call it Pashtun protection movement. It is a movement which emerged around 3 years ago from the tribal areas of Pakistan, from the ex-tribal areas of Pakistan, which were a hub of militancy and terrorism in Pakistan. And for decades, the tribal areas of Pakistan were used to nourish and to provide safe sanctuaries to terrorist organizations. They were used to train militant organizations, to recruit people for the militant organizations. So it was used as a fertile ground for militancy. But from the very same areas, a very strong movement emerged against state-enforced terrorism, against enforced disappearances, and started demanding for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, started asking for accountability, started asking for bringing an end to war economy, started asking for bringing an end to the role of military establishment in the politics. And the movement was so for the first time in the history of the movement, thousands of young people came out to the streets and they started speaking about the role of military establishment in politics and how they fuel the war economy. And that movement, the courage, it is a movement founded by young people, and this movement has given so much courage even to the traditional old school political parties that following the footsteps of the movement, even the traditional political party leaders, they got the courage to start speaking openly against the role of military establishment in politics, and started speaking about the right of people for their vote to be respected. And one of the example is a movement, PDM, Pakistan Democratic Movement, which started recently. It is an alliance of the political parties, and the political parties have come together, and they are now demanding for the military establishment to step aside and let political parties and let people of Pakistan decide the fate of Pakistan, give people the right to elect their own leaders, and have been demanding that the military establishment should stop interfering in the elections and should make sure that the elections are free and fair. So this is kind of like we had never witnessed, at least in the recent politics, we had not witnessed that traditional political leaders will come out so boldly and strongly and would name military establishment or would name the military journals or the intelligence agency generals and would call them out for interference in elections. But because of the movements built by young people, now even the traditional political parties have got some kind of courage. Another example of a democratic movement building is the women's movement, also known as Aurat March. like Women's March. So for past few years, on every 8th March, women have started organizing and coming out on International Women's Day. They organize huge marches in which women, feminist women leaders, they speak about women's rights, they speak about women's role in politics, democracy, and different sort of different women's rights issues. So in a country which has been hit by militancy for years and which has been fighting with militancy, and where the conservative religious political forces had been given so much space, it has been quite difficult for women to organize and mobilize and to build movements. But after decades, we are now seeing that women are organizing, and younger women are actually the one who are mobilizing and organizing this women's movement. But the more this the women's movement with the name of Aurat March is getting stronger, we are seeing that there is much more resistance to it. Organized hate campaigns were run against the Women March this year. Because it is such a powerful campaign, but unfortunately this year even protests were held against the women marchers, and a case of blasphemy was actually registered against women marchers. Case of blasphemy because they were asking for women's rights, for their right to life, for their right to health, and just for asking for these basic rights, they were booked in a case of blasphemy. So people are coming out, young people are organizing, women are organizing, but there is a lot of resistance to people who are organizing democratic movements or movements for democratization of the Pakistani society. And the resistance is so strong, not just by the non-state actors, as we have seen in the case of Aurat March, women marches, the other movements such as the Pashtun protection movement against war economy. We have seen that in Pakistan, it has become so the state actors are curbing all kind of dissent. They are not willing to give any kind of space to voice of dissent. The attacks on journalists have been increased. Murder attempts of journalists have been increased. The media is completely under the control of the military establishment. The media houses were forced to remove all those journalists from their jobs who were questioning the military establishment and their role in the politics. Every voice of dissent was removed from the mainstream media of Pakistan. Every vocal journalist had to lose his or her job if they were not willing to stay silent on the mainstream media. So the mainstream media and media, which is considered the fifth pillar of the state, that is completely, the media is not allowed even to give any space to political opposition leaders. People like us, we are, media is not allowed to talk about us, to talk about our movements, to give coverage to our movements and to our issues. So and beside not giving space on media, the state is also using regressive laws against human rights activists and political activists. Some of the laws which have been aggressively used against activists, political activists, human rights activists, are anti-terrorism laws of the country. The laws which were basically decades ago, which were made to curb terrorism, are used against people who are speaking against terrorism, who are speaking for democracy. They are booked in terrorism laws, under the terrorism laws. I have been booked in under the anti-terrorism laws of the country in many cases because I was speaking against terrorism, because I was speaking against the role of military establishment in politics. And I was placed on state kill list, and I had to, my life was put at risk, and I had to leave the country, and because of the threats to my life, I had to leave the country. But once I left the country, the Pakistani state authorities, they booked in revenge. They booked my parents in cases of terrorism and fake cases of terrorism to punish me for speaking out for democracy, to speak out for human rights. And similarly, there are other laws which are used against activists and journalists and opposition political activists are the cybercrime laws, because mainstream media is completely under the control of military establishment, but social media has created that alternative space where journalists and activists, they're coming in and speaking about their issues. So Pakistani state authorities are using cybercrime laws to put people in jail who are using social media to speak about democracy or human rights. Then sedition like treason laws are used against people who speak for democracy or human rights. So the laws are the same laws which were made to protect rights of the people are used to punish those who are speaking for human rights. These laws are used to criminalize human rights activism and activism for democracy. Besides that, with the as Bhavana was speaking about pandemic, so it also made me think about Pakistan and how with the pandemic, even it's not just Nepal, in the whole South Asia, we have seen that political spaces have diminished for women. Like in, you might be aware of the World Economic Forum report on the gender gap. Pakistan is now among the 4 worst countries when it comes to gender gap. Pakistan is among one of the 4 worst countries, and the share of women ministers have reduced from 12% to 10.7% in Pakistan. In India, it has reduced from 23.1% to 9.1%. So, and in the whole South Asia, we have seen that with the pandemic, because the international community is also, every country is now much concerned about its internal situation and its own healthcare situation. And for many countries, it has been an opportunity to crack down on dissent and to take away spaces for women which they had hard fought for and which they had the spaces which they had gained for themselves through decades of activism. So in none of the South Asian countries, the share of women in the parliament is above 33% in none of the country. That is really disappointing. So so coming at some of the reasons that some of the reasons for why for what's happening in Pakistan and why the democracy is weakening, we had seen that the current parliament in Pakistan is controlled parliament. By controlled parliament, I mean that it is not a space where consensus is built among the political parties. It is no more a place where issues of national interest are discussed or where politicians are empowered enough to make their own decisions, because most of the decisions when it comes to decisions regarding national interest or national issues are not even brought to the parliament. They are decided behind the doors. For example, a peace process is happening in our region. There is an important peace process in Afghanistan is happening, and the US is planning to leave Afghanistan. Pakistan is playing a really important role by bringing Taliban leaders to the table for negotiations. So, but the whole discussion of Pakistan agreeing to bring Taliban, or what will happen in the region if Taliban leaves, like while all of this is happening, the issue has not even been discussed in the parliament, and the political parties have been raising, the opposition political parties have been questioning, especially the parliamentarians from the northwest of Pakistan who are going to be affected from the geopolitics. They have been raising questions on why a national debate in the parliament was not even done to build a national consensus. But similarly, any other issue of whether it is foreign policy or any other issue, it is not brought even in the parliament to be discussed, because the Prime Minister of Pakistan or the current ruling government, they themselves, they do not respect parliament. They do not see parliament as a place where consensus should be built or discussions should be made. Similarly, some other reasons are also, I think the political parties themselves also have some blame on the weakening democracy in Pakistan. There's the lack of internal policy cohesion and focus on national issues, which has further weakened the democratic process, and one of the factors of obstructing the growth of democratic culture and ethos has been the absence of democracy within the political parties. Most of the political parties have turned into family enterprises or revolve around personalities, and there is no tradition of internal party debate on critical policy issues, and it all depends on the whims of the leaders. Party elections are just cosmetic and conducted merely for the sake of fulfilling legal formalities, and the swiftness with which politicians change their party affiliations overnight for the sake of expediency, and the manner in which political parties, who so-called, the way they take in electables also illustrate the lack of principles in our own political culture. So, and some political parties have actually also expelled its leaders who have been more pro-democracy, and leaders who were more pro-civilian supremacy, and leaders who were speaking for democracy. They were expelled by the political parties. I'm talking about Awami National Party, who expelled its most senior leaders for supporting movement, the movement of young people, which I mentioned initially in my presentation. However, even if the political parties are ceding spaces for their own vested interests, we have seen that people within the political parties, workers of the political parties, they are questioning the surrender of the political parties. They are questioning the surrender of the political parties for their own vested interests. We have seen time and again that even the opposition political parties, they cede their space very easily to the military establishment for small vested interest or for few seats. So that's it. And in the end, I would say that free and fair elections are very key in Pakistan. Free and fair elections are key to civilian supremacy. They are key to democracy. Military has to cede its spaces. It has to go back to the barracks, and the politics has to be left to the political parties of Pakistan. The current hybrid regime has to come to an end if we want to see a stronger democracy in Pakistan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gulalai, for your presentation. And now we go to another country in South Asia, which is Sri Lanka. And we are lucky to have Mr. Lucky Fernando to represent and present to us the current trends within the country with regard to democratization. So Mr. Lucky Fernando currently serves as the executive committee member of the Free Media Movement of Sri Lanka. He was an executive committee member of the Asian Forum for Human Rights and Development, or Forum Asia, and an advisory board member of the Human Rights Defenders Hub and a research project of the Center for Applied Human Rights at the University of York in the United Kingdom. He is a member of the Justice, Peace, and Integrity Creation Commission of the Catholic Major Religious Superiors of Sri Lanka, a member of the Asia Pacific chaplaincy team of the International Movement of Catholic Students, and he assists and advises several church-based and secular human rights groups in their human rights trainings, advocacy, and documentation. So his main work in the past few years has involved monitoring and documenting human rights related violations to ethnic conflict in Sri Lanka, which are disseminated to key stakeholders. So he himself has been subjected to interrogations, threats, and surveillance. In 2014, he was arrested and detained, and restrictions for overseas travel and his communication equipment was confiscated under Sri Lanka's Prevention of Terrorism Act by the Terrorist Investigation Department. So I give you, Mr. Lucky Fernando, to give a presentation with regard to the democratization movement in Sri Lanka. Mr. Lucky, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you for inviting me. I hope I'm clear because I switched to my mobile phone because my laptop kind of got stuck. May 18th is also an important day for Sri Lanka. So it's on May 18th that the war in Sri Lanka came to an end, and that was 12 years ago. But now, after the end of the war, we are still reflecting on what we have been able to achieve after 12 years of the end of the war. Particular significance is the polarization that we see between the ethnic majority in Sri Lanka and the ethnic minorities in Sri Lanka right now. The government celebrates the end of the war as a war victory, focusing on the military as war heroes. But the numerical minority of the ethnic numerical minority of Tamils, most of them grieve and mourn. So it's a big contradiction when one part of the country, one community is celebrating the majority and the other community is mourning and grieving. And this is also worsened by the government's attempts to restrict the grieving and the mourning by the minority the Tamil community. But the war for 3 decades was preceded by the conflict. And the conflict was about grievances of the numerical ethnic minority of Tamils. The conflict also still continues 12 years after the end of the war. And still there is no political solution in sight, although there have been some attempts of finding a solution before the war, during the war, and even in the 12 years after the war. There has been a lot of community struggles to find the truth, to find justice, to find reparations, but these have been under very difficult circumstances. And there is a lack of faith in different governments that have come into power since the end of the war. And there is a lack of faith in domestic systems, including the domestic criminal justice system. So that is why many survivors, victim families, and human rights defenders have been asking for international involvement, particularly through the UN. So there has been a UN Human Rights Council process. And most recently, there was a resolution passed by the Human Rights Council last March, which authorized the collection of evidence for future prosecution purposes. But this was a relatively weak resolution, I would say, a much diluted version of a report by the High Commissioner for Human Rights. But the voting pattern at the Human Rights Council was also interesting. I think from our neighboring countries in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and East Asia, South Korea was the only country that supported this resolution. There were some Pacific countries like Marshall Islands and Fiji also that voted in support, but out of the Asian countries, it was only Korea. There were some countries like India, Nepal, Indonesia, and Japan that abstained. And then there were some countries like China, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and the Philippines that voted against this resolution. So this is just a little bit of background about the war and the conflict, and why May 18th is also significant for Sri Lanka. The second part that I want to talk about is some key concerns about democracy in Sri Lanka. And this I want to particularly talk about in terms of 3 main trends. First, I want to go back to what I was talking about. Why is the war and the conflict related to democracy? It is because the war and conflict is about grievances and aspirations about the Sri Lanka's largest numerical minority, the ethnic Tamils. And they happen to be the majority in the northern province and the eastern provinces of Sri Lanka. Clearly in the northern province, with a clear majority, but due to various colonization schemes of the government, about 1/3 in the east at the moment. So this is the war and the conflict is very much about democracy in Sri Lanka, because democracy is not about majoritarianism, but it is a lot about the rights of the numerical minorities, which I think is a very key in a democracy. And I think in terms of the background of this in Sri Lanka about majority and minorities, key demand that led to the war is by the Tamils for power sharing, right? About some degree of autonomy and recognition as a nation. But during the war, this demand was escalated to a separate state. But since 2009, again, the demand is for power sharing, some degree of autonomy and recognition as a nation. And also the major political forces, there have been 2 major political forces that have ruled Sri Lanka. They have lost every parliamentary election in the northern province. So basically it's very clear that the national numerical minority doesn't want to be ruled by these 2 national level political forces. And it's significant to note that since the end of the war, another numerical minority, Muslims, have also been subjected to discrimination, harassment in policy and practice. And then there are also other marginalized groups based on sexual orientation, gender, farmers, the workers, migrant workers, prisoners, indigenous peoples. So basically, my first point in terms of democracy is that democracy can only be meaningful if these numerical minorities and other marginalized groups' rights and dignity can be guaranteed. Otherwise, if it's democracy, it will be meaningless if it's only about the majority and the powerful. The second point that is very significant for democracy in Sri Lanka, and I think more broadly globally, is about rule of law. It's about the institutions, and it's about laws and policies. And particularly the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary is very important, and to have a proper balance. And as well, independent institutions, like, for example, National Human Rights Institutions. In the case of Sri Lanka, the executive has a very strong power. From 1978, our constitution has given a significant degree of power to the executive. And in a constitutional amendment last year, in 2020, August, the executive was further strengthened, and the judiciary and the legislature was further weakened. Independent institutions were also weakened. So this 20th amendment to the constitution last year, in the middle of a pandemic of COVID-19, was a big blow to democracy in Sri Lanka. We have also seen a high degree of militarization in Sri Lanka. I don't think we have a military government ever in Sri Lanka, but we have seen the military coming into civil and political power slowly. The head of the COVID-19 operations is also the army commander. They also have a very prominent roles at district levels, and even they are involved in economic activities. And also we had a recent presidential commission of inquiry and a parliamentary resolution which tried to interfere in the work of the Attorney General, who is the prosecutor in Sri Lanka, and also the judiciary. So the third part about the democracy, which I think is very significant, is about dissent. To be able to challenge, critique governments and others' practices and policies without actual reprisals or even fears of reprisals. So this is a lot about the human rights defenders, about media freedom and civil society space. So to summarize again, I think the important test of democracy, there are three from perspective of Sri Lanka. One is the rights of numerical minorities and other marginalized groups. The second is rule of law, about independent institutions, about just laws and policies. Thirdly, the right to dissent without fear of reprisals. So in Sri Lanka, there has been no visible democracy movement. I think one of the most visible democracy movements is in Myanmar right now. And of course, in Korea also, we have seen very significant democracy movements. But we don't have something like that in Sri Lanka. But there are many scattered community struggles. There are struggles by youth, there are struggles for the environment, there are struggles in the north and east by the numerical ethnic minority of Tamils. There have been struggles by the Muslims. There have been struggles by people who've been victimized in various ways, like families of disappeared people. There has been struggles against for economic justice, particularly against microfinance loans. There have been struggles by farmers, etc. So there has been various community struggles, but there's no like a national visible democracy movement in Sri Lanka as of now. And there have also been legal institutional struggles. I think the judiciary has been an important platform of struggle as well. So lastly, I want to talk a little bit about the importance of international solidarity. This has always been very important in Sri Lanka. And I think significant, I want to highlight some significant things about international solidarity. And I think I can talk about this because I think I have personally also been a beneficiary of international solidarity. So I had friends in Korea who were very vocal in supporting me and calling for my release when I was arrested, for example, and in many other countries across the world and international organizations. So one important point about international solidarity is that we have to be cautious about being overly optimistic in anticipating that the UN Human Rights Council resolution will advance accountability, human rights and democracy in Sri Lanka. There has been, I think, some degree of over optimism, unrealistically. Although it provides us some opportunities, I think we have to be very conscious of its limits. the UN Human Rights Council resolution even ignores many of the recommendations of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. It ignores many of the appeals of survivors and victim families in Sri Lanka, including a referral to the ICC, asset freezes and travel restrictions, vetting of military trainings and UN peacekeeping, international aid, and caution about deportations to Sri Lanka. And I think these are relevant even to some Asian countries. For example, vetting of military personnel and trainings, particularly about aid. Korea is a case in point because I think Korea is increasingly becoming a country that provides aid to other countries in the Asian region, including Sri Lanka. So we need to be careful about for what purposes and through whom aid is provided. And also, I think the international attention is more on Geneva or the UN's actions, and less on community struggles. So I think it's important that international organizations, including universities, including NGOs, UN officials, also pay attention to community struggles in Sri Lanka, and not only be concerned about the Geneva process or the UN processes related to Sri Lanka. And it's also important to focus on both civil and political rights and economic, social, and cultural rights. And often we see unrealistic kind of a separation of these two, and these two are very much, I think, dependent upon each other. So lastly, I think to mention about Korea, I think Korea has been a place of inspiration for many Sri Lankan activists, including to me. I have been to Gwangju several times at different, I think 2017 was last time, and many other Sri Lankan activists have been there. So I think there has been many inspirations that we have got from Korea. And also I think there has been people who had come for trainings in Korea, who have learned about the democracy struggles in Korea. There has been volunteers who had come from Korea to Sri Lanka to work, to share experiences and to contribute. There has been Sri Lankan organizations which have received small funding for human rights, democracy, governance related from Korea. And like I said, personally, I have benefited from the solidarity extended to me when I was in trouble by my friends and colleagues in Korea. So I hope that Korea, and particularly Gwangju, will continue to be a kind of a center for offering solidarity for democracy and human rights struggles of different Asian countries, and particularly community-based struggles. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ruki, for your discussion regarding the state of democratization in Sri Lanka. So now we proceed to the equally interesting part of the discussion, which is an open forum or an open discussion among our speakers today about, South Asia in general and the challenges and issues with regard to democratization. So, of course, as part of the international community, we support all actions that are geared towards solidarity in the region, and that includes, calls for, greater freedoms for activists and those who are restricted right now. And among those, actually, is the father of Miss Gulalai, who is still currently held in jail. And our solidarity goes to her and her family, as well as those who are currently detained. And we call for their immediate release. So ADN published a statement regarding this issue, and we hope that international support will come through and demand for the release of the father of Ms. Gulalai. So now, the three discussants mentioned about the transition of democracy in South Asia in their respective countries. And actually, they have transitioned from one form of authoritarian governance to a more relatively freer form of governance. Nepal experienced militarization, Pakistan also experienced militarization, and Sri Lanka experienced a form of strongman rule. However, despite these challenges, or despite these authoritarian, despite from moving from a authoritarian form of governance to a more democratic one or a freer one, there seems to be an international capture, an institutional capture, which prevents or hinders full democratization. So from your perspective, what are the factors that contributes or the causes of these institutional capture which hinder democratization? So perhaps I go to Ms. Bawana first. With regard to Nepal, what are these issues from your perspective?
Pardon, can you please just summarize the question?
What are the causes of the institutional capture or the factors that hinder full democratization in Nepal?
Yeah, actually, Nepal has its own example because if we talk about the democratization process or peace process, we have a very good example that we had a peace accord in 2006 between the then Maoist and the government. And there was a 12-point agreement, and there was a 16-point agreement. Lots of agreement has done between two parties, and then the then Maoists also came into politics, major politics, and then major thing is that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the Disappear Commission, it was agreed to have a separate commission, which is established in 2015. And the process, the two commissions should work, more focusing on the reparation of the victim, and providing relief and providing justice and documenting all the cases. But the aspirations of people, aspirations of victim is not properly ensured. But the international community support is also there. Like we had UN was there when we had a conflict. At that time, UN was there, and then UN took major part to establish a peace process and the dialogue between two parties. And international communities different human rights organizations, for example, Amnesty International, and even local NGOs, we also worked very hard to convince Maoists to come in the peace process. So the major thing is that we had a human rights commission on place, which was independently working, and which was given the feedbacks and suggestions to the government if there is a human rights violations, severe, adaptation, adoption, such kind of issues were happening before. So the Human Rights Commission, human rights, civil society organization, international communities, they also played a vital role to establish, especially the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and Disappear Commission, which are supposed to mitigate, which are supposed to manage, or which are supposed to finish all the tasks, but still, these commissions are not yet functioning very well as per the expectation of the people. But in terms of institutionalization, in terms of policies, in terms of other processes, Nepal is very unique. We had one peace processes. We did dialogue, we did we came in a single table, and then we had a discussions, we convinced, and we have we have a peace accord, which is very significant document to come to the peace processes. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Bawana. I would like to go to Ms. Gulalai with regard to her thought regarding the movement in Pakistan. We are glad that despite the challenges that that Pakistan is currently experiencing right now, that there have been moves to resist, and that these movements are beginning to spring and blossom. No, but as of now, what can be done both internationally and domestically to ensure that these movements or the successes of these movements will be more inclusive and will be more participatory, so that the successes of these movements are sustainable, and that they would actually present growth for Pakistan. So, Ms. Gulalai, please.
Thank you so much, Karel, for such an important question. In Pakistan, the military establishment has been in control and in power for so long, either directly or indirectly, that almost all institutions are under their control now. And it is so easy for the military establishment of Pakistan to engineer the elections and to have the kind of results which they want to like. They have the capacity to make politicians ineligible even to run for elections just before the election. They have the power to even remove prime ministers of the country from their positions by making false cases against them. We have seen that despite that, for the past 13 years, there was weak democracy in Pakistan, but not a single prime minister of Pakistan could complete his 5 years term, because the moment they start taking independent decisions, the military establishment knows how to use judiciary against them, how to use accountability mechanisms against them. Currently, the institution which is known as National Accountability Bureau, that institution is used against political opponents by the military establishment as well as by the current political government against the opposition. So the whole corruption, the narrative of corruption, or the narrative of standing against corruption, and the narrative of accountability is used to is used against politicians who are anti-military establishment. But coming to your question on what can be done, I think the role of international community is so important. Unfortunately, what we are seeing currently, that the international community is giving legitimacy to the hybrid regime. It is giving legitimacy to the military establishment. I will give you an example. As I mentioned in my presentation, that major decisions of national interest or foreign policy are not even discussed in the parliament. They are decided behind the doors. So coming back to this to the current peace process, which is happening in our region with Afghanistan and the US, and Pakistan is also involved. There is a special envoy of the US for this peace process. His name is Zalmay Khalilzad. And whenever he comes to Pakistan to discuss the role of Pakistan in that peace process, he even does not meet the political leaders of the country. He even does not meet the prime minister or the foreign minister. He comes directly and meets the chief of army staff of Pakistan. He comes and directly meets the army, make discussions and decisions with the military of the country. So by overtaking the politicians, by not including and by not making decisions about foreign policy with our politicians and political leaders, and by directly discussing those matters with the military establishment, international community give legitimacy to the entire democratic forces in the country. So what we need to do in this right now is to hold international community accountable for strengthening hybrid regimes, for backing hybrid regimes, and for bypassing and ignoring political leadership of the country and directly engaging with the military establishments of the country. Why US is engaging with the military of Pakistan? Why it is not making or engaging with political leadership of the country? So that is one thing. And number second is that I think European countries like European Union, they have a really important role in making sure that in kind of using their influence to make sure that the movements for democracy are strengthened, and that people who lead these movements are not persecuted. Because there are, for example, with European Union, Pakistan has a special GSP plus status given by the European Union, which gives access to the which gives access to Pakistan and Pakistani products to the European Union marketing without kind of like taxation and duty. But to get that status, Pakistan is supposed, or any other country which gets that status, it is supposed to implement all UN conventions related to human rights, democracy, labor rights, environment. So you know, these countries, because they give financial benefits to Pakistan, and it takes commitment that Pakistan has to implement all these conventions, so they should more effectively monitor, and they should speak for us. When we have seen that while we were persecuting, when I was getting persecuted in 2019, when my parents were getting persecuted in 2019, unfortunately, we have seen like networks like Asian Democracy Network who stood with us, or organizations, civil society organizations internationally taking stand and issuing statement for us. But unfortunately, I would say that the role of other countries has been really disappointing. And if you people who know me, they would know, if a high profile activist like me and a very well-known family of activists like us can be brutally persecuted by the Pakistani state authorities without any consequences by the international community. Can you imagine what will be happening to the activists who are not well known to the world? What will be happening to the democracy activists, to the political activists, human rights activists who are not well known to the world? They're getting disappeared, they're getting persecuted, they're being booked under cybercrime laws, under the anti-terrorism laws, they're even being enforced disappeared. Like one of the elected member of the National Assembly, like member of the parliament, who is leader of the movement which I mentioned, Pashtun Tafas movement, or which is also known as Pashtun Spring. In the world, it is known as Pashtun Spring. He is in prison for months, and the decision on his bail has been made by the court. But they're not announcing the decision. A decision has been made, but they're not announcing the decision for many months. So he is an elected representative, but just because he's speaking for an end to war economy, he's speaking against enforced disappearances, he's speaking for democracy and against terrorism, he's in jail for so many months and no one bothers. The UN is not bothering, international community is not bothering. So, you know, I think that when the international community choose to stay silent over the persecution of political activists, human rights activists, and young people, they enable the persecutors. They enable those who persecute us for speaking out and for taking a stand for democracy, for taking a stand for human rights. So what we need is a really strong international solidarity at this moment. If we want these movements to become successful and to be able to have an impact, I think we need a greater international solidarity, not just for the well-known activists like me, but every other activist who is there on the ground, fighting and building movements, organizing movements for democratization of our communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your response. Now, I want to go to Mr. Ruki, because Mr. Ruki in the past has also engaged in international bodies to sort of demand and address democratization and human rights issues that, you know, he and his colleagues in Sri Lanka and in the region are experiencing. No, so Mr. Ruki, do you think that you know, the international community or the international design and the international resolution bodies that we have, are these adequately equipped to actually respond and actually assist democratization and human rights issues in the region? And what do you think can be done to improve them and to make them more responsive, and so that the benefits of international solidarity can reach the ground as Ms. Gulalai you know, envisions? So what do you think, Mr. Ruki?
Okay, it's a complex question. So I have engaged with bodies like the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Now, this is often seen as a body that is very regressive, no, not pro-human rights, not pro-democracy. But in certain situations, particularly when our Muslim community in Sri Lanka was subjected to a lot of reprisals, a lot of discrimination and harassment, I think there has been some positive interventions from the Organization of Islamic Countries. And some of the, I think the voting pattern in the last Human Rights Council session related to the resolution on Sri Lanka was also influence, and some Islamic countries, I think excluding countries like Bangladesh and Pakistan, were either abstaining or supporting. For example, Bahrain traditionally, has not been very supportive, but they abstained. I think which was quite important in that context of the resolution. I also engaged with the Commonwealth, another large international organization, but most of my experience has been with UN, so particularly with the Human Rights Council, special rapporteurs, committees, and so forth. But I think when we engage with international bodies, we have to understand that these are, their members are governments. So we have to, it's not only represented by staff members like a High Commissioner for Human Rights or a special rapporteur, or they are not represented by a few volunteers like experts who serve on a committee or so forth. So the primary decision makers are the states, member states, and they are represented by the governments. So unless we are able to influence governments, we can't expect too much from the UN. Now, Sri Lanka is a very good example. Because for many years we asked support from the UN Human Rights Council, and I think for the last 15 years or so I have been going to Geneva, except last year, 2020, I think, and 21. For so many years, every year, 2-3 times I would go, and I would be meeting them here as well. So, but we realized slowly that we were dependent too much on the Western countries. If we take the composition of the UN Human Rights Council, only 7 countries are from the Western Bloc. 13 countries are Asian, 13 countries are from Africa. Latin American and Caribbean states are 8 countries. So I think we have to engage with all these governments. And then only the UN can act. If we can get the support of the Latin American, Caribbean governments, if we can get the support of some African governments, some Asian governments, only the UN can actually act. Otherwise, I think it's an illusion that the UN can act, and we get blown away from this idea of Western countries. I also want to add another dimension, that international solidarity is not only about the intergovernmental bodies. Like the UN or the Commonwealth or the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. The solidarity and the support that we get from May 18 Foundation or various other organizations is also international support. So there are various other non-governmental organizations, there are student groups, there are farmers groups, there are various social movements. And I think these groups are very, very important. There are journalist organizations, there are lawyers organizations, there are scholars, artists, and all these kinds of social movements are there. And I know that personally I have experienced a lot of benefit from these groups. International media plays an important role. Artists play an important role. So I think we have to, when we say international solidarity, we have to look at it in a broad way and not get blown away by just the UN or intergovernmental bodies like the Commonwealth or ASEAN or SAARC.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ruki, for that response. Now, I want to go to a different dimension, which is the role of ODA or official development assistance and financing. So recently, or I attended last night, the discussion in Korea regarding the fact that they are trying to establish a democracy fund to support human rights and democratic movements in not only in the region and in Asia, no? So from your perspective, what focus should be what sort of focus should be done or should be given to South Asia? Should it what are the priorities that should be tackled when using this ODA? And from your previous experience of your countries receiving ODA, how has this impacted your country? Is this adequate, or are there things that should be reformed or should be taken into account? So maybe I go to Ms. Bawana again for this question.
Thank you so much, Karel. Actually, in my understanding, ODA is more focusing on development work rather than democracy, peace building, or CSO engagement processes. In the context of Nepal, mainly the international funds come under the Ministry of Finance, right? Ministry of Finance has to approve the international fund, and they have control. They have some priorities issues, for example, infrastructure, health, sanitation, other issues. So the ODA is more focusing on the development issues rather than the creating or enabling CSO spaces, or free speech, and and the right of the people, such kind of things. Like ODA should also be need to work with civil society organization, and some of the like percentage that they have been allocating for South Asia, especially developing countries, has to be accessible to the local civil society organizations, and they have to work equally with government as well as civil society organization, and mainly in the SAARC region. Not only the SAARC, there is also the People's SAARC. There are lots of peoples who are united through People's SAARCs, and there are other like CSO coalitions, CSO networks, and they also can work with the civil society organization in the region. So we have to more focus to access the resources for the civil society organization, to enhance enabling environment for civil society, free like speech and freedom of speech, and also the like free movement from one country to another country. So mainly the resources can be utilized to identify the fact, and also they can report, report the public. So if they publicize the fact, then only the government can realize, what is going on, what is right or what is wrong. Even though Nepal government, they deny to accept the fact, because there are some example. We had international report says the corruption index, the hunger index, but the Nepal government questions about its reliability, though internationally we can create pressure towards the government, and the civil society need to be more united. If we see the ASEAN region, there are lots of like collaboration, networking is visible, but in Nepal, in South Asia, we have a very loose network, but not so much visible. So I request ODA to specifically focus for civil society and freedom of speech, and enabling environment for civil society, not only the development, development in terms of physical development. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Bawan. Ms. Gulalai, I mean, I know that Pakistan also is receiving at a tremendous rate as well, or a tremendous amount of ODA or development assistance. So do you think responding to the same question, do you think that, what can be done to make this ODA more inclusive, more for the people, and for protecting human rights and democracy in the region? Your response, please.
I agree with Bhavana that it should be really ensured that ODA not just works only with the government and government agencies, but also to include civil society, and not just to work with civil society, but also to make sure that civil society is included in the discussions and is included in the decisions about in setting up priorities. And also, I think that the UN with the has throughout the years has kind of understood that development cannot be achieved, or development goals cannot be achieved without gender justice, without democracy, without peace, without inclusion of everyone. And that is why in SDGs we see that now there are goals around peace and justice, and around goals around women's inclusion in political processes and decision making. And I think that it should also translate to ODA, and therefore more investment should also be made when it comes to economic development. There should be more investment on strengthening democratic processes, on strengthening political process in the country, on strengthening civil society, and especially making sure that women are, even when it comes to economic priorities only, making sure that women are represented in the, that women are included in it, and more investment is made on women's economic empowerment as well, because we know that economic empowerment is strongly linked to the political empowerment of women. So I would kind of like say that more inclusion of women, and more investment in the initiatives on empowering women is really important. And I also just wanted to say, I forgot to mention in the previous question that my father has been released from the prison around 3 weeks ago, though the persecution continues and he has to appear in the court on a daily basis because the trial has begun. In the case in which he was arrested, they had begun the trial. So it's a tedious process of going to the court on a daily basis. It is having a huge toll on them. And just like my father, who was a political prisoner, but even during the pandemic, while many countries were releasing the prisoners, political prisoners were still not released just like my father. They were forced to, the trials were begun and they were forced, just like my father, political prisoners or people who are politically persecuted, they were forced to appear in the courts during the pandemic, making them much more vulnerable to the corona. Just like my parents got the virus, they got infection from the courtroom. But thank you for the solidarity. And coming back to the ODA, adding priorities on political inclusion, and especially political inclusion of young people, because if we look at the political landscape of the South Asia, a few years ago, young people were seen as troublemakers. They were seen as, oh, we have huge population of young people, and that was seen as a trouble, as a problem. Oh my God, what we have to do? We have huge youth population, and they were seen as source of the conflict. They were seen as, it's the discussions around unemployment, discussions around conflict. They would see young people as a trouble, as a trouble that needs to be solved, a problem. But the current movements for democracy all over the South Asia, especially in Pakistan, the movements for democracy, the movements for ending, the movement calling for an end to war economy, movements calling for an end to terrorism, has once again proved that young people are not the troublemakers. They're the problem solvers. They are problem solvers of the problems created by the elder generation or by the institutions which keeps reinforcing inequalities. Young people are the problem solver, and they are the courage. I think that the courage of young people has kind of like opened eyes of even the traditional political forces, and they have learned how to, with courage and bravery, how to actually build movements for democracy. So ODA should, in their priorities, should make sure to invest on the empowerment of young people and to support initiatives of young people. Because if we want sustainability of the initiatives, then we need not just international, but also regional support for those movements and for those young people who are coming forward and who are setting up new standards of courage and bravery.
Thank you very much for that response. Now I want to go to Mr. Ruki. We are here gathered today because we are commemorating the May 18 events, no? And right now we are at the critical juncture here in the region where we see demonstrations and actions of resistance from all over the region. Looking at South Asia, and reflecting on where we are right now in the region with regard to democratization and human rights, where do you think our region or South Asia is heading? Do you see some possible prospects where we can focus our energy on? And what are the challenges to these prospects, Mr. Ruki?
Well, I think some of the things that I mentioned about Sri Lanka situation of minorities, about the difficulty faced by human rights defenders critiquing government practices and policies, about weak institutions, national human rights institutions, not inadequate checks and balances between executives and legislation, all common in most countries in the South Asian region to varying degrees. So I think these are important things that it's critical to pay attention to. And also I think we do have some organizations like the South Asians for Human Rights, People SAC, and various other kind of South Asian networks. But it's important to have those can be focused on is protection of human rights defenders, and also in terms of how South Asian countries can support human rights defenders in the South Asian countries. I mean, we, for example, have some experience in the past where we had some Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Maldivian human rights defenders who came to Sri Lanka for temporary relocation, and we were able to welcome and support some of them. So I think like that, I know Nepal and India have hosted my colleagues and friends, Sri Lankan human rights defenders, when they had to, they found it difficult to be here. So I think that kind of a very practical, in a way, short-term measures should also be considered as form of solidarity and networking. And I think, again, going back to the question about ODA also, no, I think this is the kind of thing that even ODA can support, supporting human rights defenders, journalists who are facing risks. So we often find that when we want to get support for these initiatives to support human rights defenders, solidarity actions within South Asia or within Asia, we have to go to the EU or to go because the Asian region doesn't cover these. So I think it's important that now that we are talking about the English work, and important that maybe South Korea can kind of set example by supporting more work related to protection and support for human local level, national level, but also at South Asian and Asian level.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rookie, for your response. Now, for the interest of time, I believe that we have to suspend or go away with the question and answer portion from the public. But if there are questions directed to the speakers, we would like you to send them to adn@adn.org, adnasia.org, so that we can provide these questions to our speakers and so that they can provide a response to you as well. Now, throughout this discussion, we have witnessed or we have heard from our speakers the importance of international solidarity to address and promote democratization. And South Asia should be also provided ample support, given that they face the same issues that the rest of us in Asia are also facing. So they exist, South Asia does not exist in a vacuum. There should be more inclusive actions that promote and prioritize issues in South Asia, given that the situation there is also concerning, and that human rights and development is a bit lagging, and challenges are abound. No, so. Thank you very much for this discussion. I would like to thank our participants and our discussants for this discussion. We do hope that we can engage with you again in the future for possible collaborations and possible discussions like this, so that we can surface issues with regard to democracy and human rights, and that the world knows that we have eloquent speakers who can actually present and promote South Asian voices and South Asian issues in the stage. Now, thank you very much. I'm again Karel, Jiaan, Antonio Galang of the Asia Democracy Network. And I would like to give the floor to my boss, Sue, for our next actions. Thank you very much.